Welcome to the break-even modeling video. So I always find that students have a tough time trying to decipher when they're tackling word problems on how to approach those word problems and then what type of maybe equations to use. Even if you have an open book test or exam or you're studying, typically you pretty much have all the resources available to you, but you still have to somehow figure out what models in these break-even word problems am I going to be using so that I can solve them. So the concept of breaking even, it's not a very difficult one for any business that you have that is selling items or some kind of a service. They always have to check and ideally, get to the point where their sales that they have, which is often known as revenue. So all the money that is coming in from all their sales in terms of items or services, so all that money that is coming into the business, how does it tackle with all the costs? So all the different spending that is happening within the business. So that is money which is basically coming out and being used to maintain the business, to pay for different things like staff and paying the lights and rent, or making the items that they have to do, so they need actually money. So your revenue or your sales, when these two equate, so when they're equal in value, then we call that particular point in time to be the break-even point. That is the total number of sales that you have to do in order to finally cover all the costs that you have. And now, when we know that, when we have all these sales and when we have all of these different costs, we very often get different types of information within word problems. So because we are just starting break-even, or at least you are just beginning the modeling of these break-even problems, there are typically two types of problems that you run into. Okay, so the two types of problems that you have are kind of within here. So notice I put in kind of like a scale and a weighing factor. So when this thing is balanced, okay, so when these guys align, so when these two things align in some way, we are at the break-even point. Okay, so now for break-even, instead of writing it continuously, I'll just use BE. So this first model that you see, okay, so within these boxes, in a word problem, you might be given, for instance, all the sales that have happened within a certain amount of time. Now, that time might be a month, maybe it's a quarter, which is 3 months, maybe it's a year, okay, maybe it's 2 years. So it is a certain amount of time, okay, that we have. And if you figure out all the different sales that you have received, then you're going to be able to say, okay, so that's how much money has come into my business. Now, that is always being counteracted by kind of two different things, okay, at least for our purposes on break-even. Now, before you even start, okay, to make any products or create any services that you have, you're always going to have associated fixed costs. Now, what is this fixed cost? Because you see it in break-even questions quite often. So I like to always kind of say that these fixed costs that we have, okay, so these ones are independent of making any of the items that your company might be selling later on, or any services that they have. So independent of how many you make, okay, or how many services you have, you're going to have an associated fixed costs. Now these fixed costs, they can be a lease, maybe for the warehouse that you have, okay? It can be, rent or lease again of the machines that you use, okay? So that could be another one. Now, there are many different types of costs which are irrelevant or not associated necessarily with how many items you sell within a specific time. So when you look in a word problem for fixed costs, okay, it doesn't matter if they say lease or if they say, borrowing money or something else. The key item to look out for is that fixed costs are always given per a certain amount of time. So for example, a lease on a warehouse, maybe they'll tell you that you're going to be leasing some big warehouse for $10,000, but they have to tell you for how long. And now this may be, let's say, per month. Now, that per month, this is a time basis. So it doesn't really matter what you do in that warehouse, but you know that you're going to have to pay a fixed cost of $10,000 for every month that you're within that lease agreement. That is fixed. That will not change for that month. Now, it may change in the future because you may renegotiate your contract, but for that time, it is not going to change, okay, for that particular month. The machines maybe that you rent, you also sign some agreement which might be per month or maybe per week, okay, or maybe for a quarter. So what I would want you to always watch out for in your word problems, fixed costs are always on a timely basis, okay? It's for some certain amount of time. Now, the next item that you have just below it, well, if fixed costs are per a time basis, now your total variable costs. So notice the key word here, which is variable. That variable means that something is changing. So this right here means that something is changing. Now, your lease won't change for that month or for that quarter. It will stay the same. Now, what may change? Well, the more materials that you use, right? Or the more items that you make, your costs are going to be going up. So if you make one item, you're going to have an associated amount of money for that one item. Now, if you make two items, well, now all of a sudden, you're going to pay a bit more. Now, if you make 3 items, 4 items, 5, and it continues, every time you would make an item, your variable costs keep going up. So the distinguishing feature here is fixed costs do not change if you're making more items. They will stay the same for a duration of time, while your total variable costs are changing. And these are not necessarily with respect to time. Total variable costs are associated with how many items or how many services you actually are making. So when we go and I'll show you a couple of examples, you will see that these total variable costs associated with those things that change are different from the fixed costs. So that will be our first model, okay? And in this model, they're going to give us totals. So we're going to have a total amount for a certain amount of time. Now, the other model, which is the one which is just below, here, when you're looking at word problems, what you will find is you're going to run into something interesting. That instead of them giving you totals like they did in the model above, so notice it's all total, here they might just give you, well, what is the sale price just for one item or one service that your business is going to be selling? So these guys right here, this is always per one item. So model number 1 on top deals with a total, and you don't know how much one item actually is being sold for or not. In model number 2, the word problem might actually tell you exactly how much one item is being sold for or one service is being sold for. Fixed costs here are identical for both situations, for the one above and for this one. So distinguishing fixed costs is always going to be dependent on the amount of time and not dependent on how many items that you have. So these fixed costs are the same. Now, the word variable costs, now you might say, oh, that is the same thing as above. What is missing here is the word total. Total means all the items that you made. How much did they cost you? All of those items. Variable cost is how much did one item cost you? So not all of them, but how much is just one of those items. So now you have these two different models, and those are really the only ones that you run into these introductory break-even questions. So let's see them in action, because it's really important to understand, okay, how these models are applied to word problems, okay, because the equations that you will later use in order to solve the word problems will depend if you understand what is given to me. Are totals given to me, or is it per one item that is given to me in the break-even question? So let's take a look. So here is an example. So the example I'm going to highlight, okay, all the different information. So I want to show you how I break down word problems, because for anyone that's new, your subconscious in terms of trying to understand a question isn't as developed because you haven't done as many of these questions. So you have to try to figure out a model, a strategy, okay, to take out the information and then to know, okay, how to solve it. So I actually don't have to read anything within these questions. All I will try to do is I'm just going to highlight all of these numbers that they give us. So now if I take all the numbers that I see, okay, and I'm just highlighting them, so now what I want to do is, well, if I read this, are these numbers that they're giving me, are they per one item or per one service, or are they totals that they provide? And the first question that you see here is this a fixed cost, variable cost, selling price model type of question, or is it a fixed cost, total variable costs, and all the sales model? Meaning, are they asking, or is this question this model where they give us all totals, or is it per one item model? Now, once you distinguish that, then it is much simpler to try to understand what equations you're going to use to solve it and what steps you're going to need. So we have two companies have joined forces to create a new technology cloud computing product. Now, in terms of break even, you don't really care what product it is. You're interested in the numbers. So the next sentence says the product development costs per service will be $225. And now this is the key. Okay, so it says per service. So the costs are per service. So just that, when you're reading, should ring a bell to you that, hey, this is not a total, this is just per one. So that's the first giveaway. Now, if I continue, it says administrative costs, again, per service will be 0.75. So I have two costs associated per service. So if you scroll back up, okay, you will notice that basically we're going to be dealing with the second model, even without going into further details. Because what they're giving me is this. They're giving me these variable costs that I have there. Those variable costs are always per item. Now, when I say per item, per service, okay, you can say per one sale. Okay, so they can use interchangeable words which mean the same thing, per one. So these are costs per one. So these tell me that if I would continue, now I can read the whole question through. You still have two companies, okay? So they have leased out an office for developing the new product at a cost of $15,000 per year. So notice that $15,000, it says per year. So it's not per service or per one item. It's per year. It's for a time length. That time length tells you that this is a fixed cost. It is independent of how many services they sell or they have. So that per year is associated with fixed costs. So that's important. Remember, per item and per time length. Now this one is per year, but the next sentence, which says the rental costs of the tools needed for the development will be at $1,575 per month. This is per month. Again, that is not per service that they're going to sell. Okay, these things they have to pay for whatever tools that they use, okay, and then for whatever office that they're renting out. Now notice they are different. One is per year, one is per month. Next, currently the companies can only handle a maximum service capacity of 10,000 users. So this means that for whatever reason, whatever office they have, maybe whatever servers that they're using or staff that they have, they cannot exceed 10,000 users. Their platform will not allow it. So that is a capacity. That's the maximum amount that they can maintain. Now they decide that they will agree to charge a fee per service of $9. And again, I want to highlight for you, per service. So we had costs per service, and now the selling, okay, they're charging customers again per service. So which model is this? Well, the model, so I'm going to delete this right here. The model is fixed costs are given, The variable cost, remember, variable cost is per one item, and the selling price per one item. So that is the model given. So now what we have is that for this one, the next question says, if it is this fixed cost, variable cost, selling price model, then they want us to find the fixed cost, variable cost, and the selling price. So those come from all the highlighted items. So this is for B. Now, they are first asking us for all the fixed costs. So fixed costs were supposed to be all items which is on a timely basis. Okay? So my fixed costs here that I have, okay, I have a 15,000. Now this is per year basis. And I have 1575, but it's per month. So those are my fixed costs. Now my variable costs that I have, those are all the costs that are associated per one item. So these ones were $2.25 per service. Now these ones are per one, so we can directly add them, and 0.75, which is $3. That is per one service. And finally, the selling price, that's per one, they've decided that will be $9. Again, the key thing is these numbers are per one item. So part C, okay, says if it is the other model. Well, it's not that model, so part C is irrelevant. Now for part D, finding your total revenue and your total cost functions, okay, so these ones now can be created because you have your fixed costs, variable costs, and selling price. Now the key item is that they have to tell you the time length for these functions. Is it on an annual basis per year? Is it per quarter? Okay, is it for 2 years? So we would need a little bit more information. But in this video, I just want to show you how to pick off the information from a question instead of solving it. So that's what I was interested in. So that's example 1, okay, where it directly tells you per item. Now let's take a look at the second example. Here's an example. A small company has finished their quarter with total sales of 140,000. Now, total sales. Notice, it doesn't say per one item or per one service, okay, or per one product. It says total sales. That is important. Now, it also tells us for the quarter, so we actually know the total time. Now, after some research, the company has noticed that the fixed costs for the quarter, so the fixed costs were 41,200. And the total variable costs, okay, equaled 70,000. Now, the standard capacity for the quarter that they have. So the amount that the total they can handle in all these sales is 175,000. That's the capacity. Now notice in the previous question, capacity was given in units because it was per one. But here in the question, there is no per one. It's all given in totals. So right away, that is important because when you're reading these questions and when you're trying to solve them, you have to be able to distinguish. Is this a break-even question with regards to per item, or is it a break-even question with regards to totals for a certain amount of time? So now, if I wanted to answer part A, which is the same question as before, which model this is? Well, this is the model with, they're giving me fixed costs, the total variable costs, and all the sales. That's the model that they give me. So part B, I can skip because it's not that model, which means, well, if they give me these totals, now my fixed cost, so I know the total, they gave that to me. I don't have to add anything up. However, I do know it's per quarter, so that's the total time, 3 months. But what I do not know now is I don't know how much it is per one item. So in these types of models, the easiest thing to do, okay, is if they don't give you per item, you can make the assumption that the selling price is just $1, just so it makes it easy and simple for yourself, because you're going to be dealing just with total volume in sales, in money, per dollar, instead of per item. But that means, how do you find the variable cost? Right? What is the variable cost? What is it per item? Well, I chose to have it per dollar because it's all in sales. So how do I know now variable cost? So the key trick is, and someone has to either tell you, or maybe you're bright enough to try to figure it out. The key item is that you need to know that sales and the total variable costs are related. And what we do is we take in this model the total variable cost and we divide it by the sales to get a ratio in between. So a comparison, how much are variable costs related to sales? So in this case, I know my total variable costs. They're 70,000. In comparison to all my sales, which were 140,000. Now, if you take this ratio, you will notice this comes out to 0.5. So now, why is this important? What this means is that your total variable costs are about 50%. Okay, so this is 50% with regards to your sales that you had. So if you make your selling price $1, well, 50% of $1 is 50 cents. So your variable cost will just be 50 cents. Now, that's not an easy topic to try to understand, okay, an easy model to understand. So I want you to try to go over and see this. And if you have questions, definitely do ask them. So these are the two models that you run into in break-even. So what I want you to do now is, I'm going to leave this question. And just as you have been getting asked questions along the way to answer, so that I kind of see if you're paying attention, try to look at this. question. And now I'm going to ask you a few questions on this one. And now that you've looked at this question, try to take a look at this. Now that's a very hard question. Now once you can pause it, read it through. I would encourage you, because now next I'm going to ask you a few questions on this as well. Now, I'm not interested in trying to solve these questions yet. I'm interested in, do you understand how to pick off the information, how to see a fixed cost, how it differs from a variable cost or from a total variable cost, and from the sales or sales per item? So here are the questions with regards to this. Good luck. And finally, so thank you for watching. And hope you found this useful. Play around with it. Good luck.